I had never seen anything like that myself, could never have pictured the beautiful town that I live in being burnt to the ground and looking out over my town and seeing nothing.
From the dawn of the spoken word, storytelling has been the backbone of human culture, warning of looming dangers and evoking our most personal fears. What you're about to hear are the real-life experiences of everyday people, brave enough to share their terrifying tales. Tales where the horror hits close to home. I'm your host, Danny. Welcome to the Hometown Horrors Podcast. Listen if you dare. Welcome back to the Hometown Horrors Podcast, everybody. Today I have on Annelise Cochran, who is a survivor of the Maui Wildfire in August 2023.
Yeah, for anybody who didn't get to see, definitely look up some pictures as you're listening, but to conjure up a mental image, the closest thing I've ever seen to the devastation in my town is pictures of Hiroshima.
Just completely burned out in black.
Yeah. I mean, everything was just gone. Where there had been 3-story buildings, there was 1 foot of rubble standing on the ground. There was just nothing. And the things that were left were shocking to see as well. A lot of the buildings have internal steel structures, and those were twisted and bent and curled up. It looked as if people are going through the photos, it looks as if that was done by bulldozers, moving some of the debris. And of course, some of that was done. But I sat there and watched that fire all night and talk more about that experience. But I watched the wind itself twist those buildings and curl them up like that. Those are the forces of nature we were dealing with that night with our intense winds, a fire that was burning so hot that it was melting cars to the road. Unbelievable.
So to give context, you were working and living in Hawaii at the time, right?
Right. So I had moved to Hawaii about 8 years prior, and I had moved out there to work on a fleet of tour boats, teaching people about whales and dolphins, taking them snorkeling and on dinner cruises, kind of the dream situation. Everybody would want to work in Hawaii
that sounds
and
idyllic.
work on a boat. And it was incredible. I had been a dolphin trainer prior to that. And so getting to talk about dolphins all day long was my passion. And I had moved there thinking I was going to be there for 6 months, but absolutely fell in love with specifically Lahaina town. I loved my job, but I loved that place. It was incredible. I would have never lived anywhere else on island if I, if I had to, I would have choose just to stay on Maui, but Lahaina was my absolute favorite. I was lucky enough that I had kind of climbed the ranks at my organization. I got to the point of sort of managing Lahaina Harbor and all of their boats, all of their staff. So I had, really made a position for myself there, carved out a little home in Lahaina town.
So before the day in question, it sounds like wildfires may have been a common thing.
Yeah, so Hawaii has wildfires pretty frequently. Most of the time they're small and they're contained effectively. Our firefighting team is used to that threat, and so it's something they jump on. And all kudos to our firefighting team on Maui. They are incredible. They try their hardest every single time, and they are almost always perfect at what they do. This situation was beyond their control. But we do have fires they often put out, and they're also often in areas that are more remote. So for those of you who haven't been to Hawaii, we're positioned on volcanic mountains. And so you get a lot of people along the coastline where the land is more flat. That's where you find a lot of the buildings and things. And then as you get more towards the center of the island, you're hitting huge peaks of elevation and much more steep cliffs and things. And so there's not as much built into the center of the island. It's more cliff faces and big peaks. And so often wildfires will burn extensively into those areas of brush that aren't well maintained, that don't have property in them. But for a fire to start in Lahaina town and then come down the mountain towards the ocean was a very unique situation. And it just so happened to occur on a night with over 120-mile-per-hour winds, which is a phenomenon that we don't see often in Hawaii in general, specifically in Lahaina. But this is what we will continue to see more of as storms from climate change increase. We're going to see bigger storms, more intensity, and not only is it going to blow over power lines and things as storms normally do, but it has the ability to push fire through a town in just a matter of minutes. So the morning of August 8th, I woke up and noticed immediately that it was very windy outside. And the wind was actually whistling in a really phenomenal way that I had never experienced before. And I remember waking up and actually taking a couple of videos outside my window, just because the sound of the wind was something I had never experienced. I found out later there's actually a legend of the Kauaula winds, which is a wind that's very specific to this area, the Kauaula Valley in Lahaina. And it's something that is well talked about in Legends of Lahaina. It's actually in our high school's alma mater. Their song talks about the strengths of these winds because it has destroyed things in our town many times before. One of the signs that they said of that wind is that there's actually a whistling sound that comes out of the mountain a couple of days prior. And unfortunately, we didn't get the couple days notice of the whistling in the mountains. I wasn't up there, but I think I heard the whistling of the Kauaula winds that morning, and it was mighty. So I immediately was trying to kind of get in touch with work, figure out what was going on. I work for this boating company. Obviously, on a day like this, our operations look very different. You're not taking people out snorkeling or on a fun dinner cruise with whipping winds and rough seas. So I got in touch with work to figure out what our day was going to look like. And pretty quickly, they called off everybody. We were having power outages. We were having trouble with cell phone connection. And since we weren't going to be taking people out in rough weather anyways, they basically just gave us like our Hawaiian version of a snow day and just said, this doesn't make sense for us to try to work today. So stay home, stay safe.
Yeah.
So everybody stayed right where they were, which is a blessing and a curse in some ways. There's moments I wish I had left my house that day. But ultimately, I'm also glad that I was home to gather a few things before I left. So our first sign that something was wrong that morning, there was some smoke up the mountain from us. And like I said before, it's not uncommon to have wildfires, to see some smoke off in the distance. It was further up the mountain. And we all in Maui follow a couple of Instagram pages that post updates about things that are happening around island. It's the quickest way for us to kind of stay in touch since it's a small island. You can reach people pretty quickly that way. And so I had hopped onto an Instagram page that I follow to just see if they had given any updates on the fire. And after a couple of hours of working the fire, they had put out a statement saying that it was 100% contained. And for those of us who have experienced wildfires in Hawaii, that's usually the moment that you can just like breathe your sigh of relief. It's all over. Everything's good. Because sometimes they'll even maintain it a couple days before they say it's fully contained if there's just a little tiny bit that's still burning somewhere. So to see 100% contained, it was like, okay, that's over. Now we're just back to dealing with this storm day. And so I went about my day as normal. I had actually taken the opportunity to drive around a little bit and pick up a couple of palm fronds that had fallen down so I could weave some palm frond roses because I had no power and I just wanted to do something at home.
Yeah.
And so I was at home making the best of our storm day, collecting some stuff to make some cool local crafts out of. And I was kind of just settled in, told my mom that I had no power and stuff. And so that it was going to be a little bit hard to contact me, updated her that there had been a fire, but that it was out. She was actually helping me keep an eye on that just to make sure that nothing else had happened. And she also felt very secure, like, yeah, it's all done. You're good. Around 3 p.m., I smelt just the faintest bit of smoke inside my apartment. I peeked my head outside. At that point, the sky was still very clear, but I could smell just a little bit of smoke. And as I peeked my head out my door, I looked to my left, and my neighbor, who's next door to me in the next apartment over, his name is Freeman Tamlung. He was standing in his doorway as well. So I looked over to him. I said, "Hey, Freeman, do you smell something?" And he was a little bit on the older side, and he was like, "Oh, no, I don't smell anything." And so I brushed it off. I was like, okay, it's probably a little bit of ash blowing down the mountain from earlier. We know there was a fire, and this is the direction the wind's blowing. So I'm probably just smelling some of the debris that's still in the air. I'm not going to worry about it. So I went back inside and I took a quick shower. And as I was getting out of the shower, I heard noise outside that I couldn't place. I went outside and the scene was very different. The sky had started to turn not black yet, but deep brown. And we were starting to lose some of the light. It was starting to get a little dimmer. There was a lot of people outside. And I realized what I was hearing was the personal smoke detectors from all the houses on the street, not quite in my building yet, but all of the houses around me were starting to have their smoke detectors going off. It was very eerie, very haunting. And, a lot of people started to gather outside at that point. So a few of my neighbors that I was very close with had kind of circled up and we were sort of talking strategy together, trying to compare information, see what was going on. And since none of us really had cell phone reception or anything, we were just asking a lot of questions. What have you heard? Have you gotten any texts? Did you see anything online? Were you able to get through? And one of my neighbors, a man named Steve, had gotten a text. He was the only one of us that received any kind of a text regarding evacuations. And we didn't know if that was because he was a different service provider. We didn't know what was causing that, but he had gotten a text. None of us did. And the text that he got said, that from one street up the mountain from that direction should all evacuate. Those people need to go. But we were down the mountain from that street. To me, this is one of the most painful parts of the entire day because we have one of the most elaborate safety alert systems in almost the world. They have sirens that they can set off to tell people to evacuate. They use them for tsunamis, fires, all kinds of different situations. And they chose not to use the sirens because they thought people were going to run up the mountain into the flames, which to that I say, if we were smart enough to elect you as officials, we were probably smart enough to not run into a fire as well. And on their website itself, it says that it's not just for tsunamis, it's for anything. So it was a ridiculous decision to not warn us with that system. And that was a decision that's come out publicly that was a choice that was made. And to have that decision followed up with decision to send out an evacuation text, but so specific to one area, it almost gave everybody else the security to stay where they were. We all felt like the best place for us was right where we were at. We didn't want to clog the roads up for the people who did need to evacuate. We wanted them to be safe. And we believed the best thing for us to do was stay where we were at, because why would the county do anything other than save us if they needed to and ask us to stay if they needed that? And so we stayed for a little bit based on that information. I think that was one huge mistake that was made out of this situation that caused probably a lot of people to stay where they were at. So we took that time while we were kind of waiting and reassessing the situation for ourselves. Steve had made some kind of offhanded joke as we were all sitting there together, like, well, if the fire comes all the way up to us, at least we have the ocean, because we lived right across the street from the ocean. There was basically one 2-lane road in between us. And I think the moment that he said that out loud saved all of our lives, because we ended up evacuating in groups. We didn't all leave together. Some were on foot, some were in cars, because we all had differences of opinion of the best way to get out. And it's not a time to fight one another on your opinion. Do what you think is best. If you want to go on foot, go on foot. If you want to go in a car, go in a car. And we ended up splitting up and we all went to the ocean. Myself and a woman named Atina and Freeman ended up in the exact same spot down the road, even though we evacuated separately. And I think it's because Steve said that out loud. At least we have the ocean. So to me, I think that was one of the things that caused us all to survive that day, is the amount of times that we all thought something and said it out loud. God forbid anybody ends up in a situation that's life or death like this. But if you do, talk, communicate, say what you're thinking out loud, because it was the combination of all of our ideas together that saved all of us. If we hadn't had any one of those ideas, more of us would have died. And so that was a pivotal moment. And we sat and kind of watched the smoke get thicker and thicker. The embers that were whipping through the air started to get more intense. They were bigger. They were starting to fall on things. They were starting to catch things on fire. They were starting to fall on the roof of the building that was next door to us. And Steve grabbed a hose and was trying to put out those embers, because the building that we lived in was cinder block, but the house next to us was not. And he was very convinced that if that house caught on fire, that all of our stuff was toast. But if we could save that house, that we would probably be
then maybe
safe.
You could push it back by just, hosing
Yeah.
off whatever came through the air.
Right. And he was incredibly smart, because looking at the damage later, that is exactly what happened. That house burnt down, and you can tell based on the blackening of the building and the way that the different units burned, you can kind of tell what order they burned in. It was definitely caused by the house next to us. So he was completely right on that as well. Unfortunately, his efforts to put out the embers on the roof obviously were not sufficient. He'd be putting out one ember and 20 more would fall. And we started to realize, like, this is going downhill quickly. It is coming. We actually have to go. So I had run inside my apartment, and I'd spent about 5 minutes just grabbing a couple of things. Many years ago, I had found this stupid set of questions. It's 36 questions that you can ask with a stranger, and it's supposed to encourage like a feeling of closeness. So if you're, trying to bond with somebody, if you're trying to form some connection, you can pull from these 36 questions. One of them was, what would you grab if there was a fire? If your house was burning down, what would you take? And I had answered that question so many times. I'm sure a couple of us have played this game before answering this question.
Absolutely.
But I had gone to this specific list of questions so many times throughout my years that I had each time refined my answer. And I've been like, well, last time I answered it, I said this, but this time I want to add blah, blah, blah. And I had thought about it so many times that when I went inside and I had 5 minutes, the first thing that came to my mind was like, I've planned this. I know exactly what I'm going to grab. And I grabbed my jewelry box that had stuff from my grandma and my dad and my grandfather, who have all passed, that were precious and irreplaceable. And I had this big drawer full of all these paper scraps that I was turning into a scrapbook. Every concert ticket I had gone to, all of the receipts from fun vacations I had been on, plane tickets, just all these fun, memories, Polaroid pictures with my friends. And I just took this entire thing and I dumped it in an IKEA bag, one of those big tarp ones. And I put my jewelry box in and I picked up one shirt and one pair of shorts and my pet bird. I threw it all into a rental car. I unfortunately had gotten into an accident in my car and it was sitting at a shop also in Lahaina. So my personal car was destroyed. I also ended up ultimately destroying a rental car in the process too. So that was a life moment for me. So I put all of my things into a rental car. And when we decided it was time to go, I had kind of had this little go kit already of things that ultimately later I would realize were not practical at all for survival. I did not bring food. I did not bring water. I brought one pair of clothes. There was a lot of things that I wish I had had later, but I also was one of the only people after the fire that I encountered that had gotten anything that was precious to them out, that had taken a moment, one singular moment to grab something they loved. So anybody listening, take a second. What would you grab? Just think about it. And then also think about, like, realistically, if you had less than 1 minute, could you reach all of those things? And if you can't, find a way to store them better.
Shout out to IKEA too.
Shout out to IKEA. I wrote them a thank you letter afterwards because I didn't realize how significant having a tarp bag like that would be in a situation like this. Not only was it big, it had 2 different size handles, so I could hold the bag above my head when I was in the ocean. I could hold it on my shoulder as I was hiking out over melted cars because the fire trucks couldn't get to us. It was able to burn more slowly than fabric. And so when embers fell on it, it would melt as opposed to catching on fire. And so most people's bags caught on fire and they lost all the things they had brought with them. Mine would melt and it would give me a second to actually go put it out before it would destroy the things inside. It was slightly waterproofed. So as I was like trudging around in the water, I tried to leave it up on the rocks, but even then, waves were kind of crashing on it. And my stuff survived, which was insane. So huge shout out to IKEA.
That's incredible.
The most amazing survival bag you would have never expected.
My parents have like 15 of those bags to carry laundry and they're amazing.
They're perfect. I wanted to be a spokesperson for IKEA afterwards. I was like, put me in an ad. I saved the melted bag. I was like, you could hang it in your corporate office if you want. It's an incredible story. So I had packed up this bag and got in my car. And I remember Freeman, my elderly neighbor next door, didn't want to leave. He was very scared. And he was the kind of person who didn't leave his place a lot anyways. We always had to kind of force him to. And our neighbors in my building were so sweet. They would always bring him groceries. They helped get cleaning services for his apartment. My neighbor, Atina, would take him out every week and just drive him around Lahaina and have him look at it because he loved Lahaina. He was born in Lahaina. There was a period about a year prior to the fire where my building was almost sold to developers to turn into essentially like a hotel or like Airbnbs for people. And the county actually ended up buying my apartment building back because it became such a heated issue because it was one of the only places that the residents of Lahaina could afford to live. And Freeman was interviewed for a news article. I read it after the fire and it shattered my soul when I read it because one of his quotes, he said, "I was born in Lahaina and I will die in Lahaina." And he did that night. And I'm just really glad that we got him out of his apartment because he did not want to leave. I remember Atina, who's like a guardian angel. She is a saint walking on this earth. She was telling him he had to leave and he said, "No, you go without me, you go without me." And she said, "Okay, Freeman, if you're staying, I'm staying." And she walked into his apartment and sat down on his couch. And she would have stayed. That was not an act. She was not going to let him be alone. And he loved her so much. Whenever he was bored, he would walk outside of his apartment. He would shout upstairs. She lived one floor above us. And he would shout up the balconies, "Atina, where are you?" And she would shout, "Freeman, I'm here." And she'd come running and they could talk or do whatever. She loved him deeply. We all did. She was not going to allow him to stay there. And he knew that. And he loved her as well. And he was not going to ask her to stay. And that was the strength he needed to leave, which was a beautiful thing to witness. Freeman was very nervous about getting in the car, but he also had some health issues that made it very, very hard for him to be on foot. I think one of the most haunting moments of the day, super eerie looking back at it. I didn't realize actually what was happening at the time. It took a couple of conversations between Atina and I before one day we were like, wait, what happened during that part of the story? And we both had to like compare notes to figure out like what actually happened because behind my building, there was a parking lot and that would have been the quickest way to get to the ocean where we were all trying to head to. But we had some issues with some houseless folks kind of hanging out in the parking lot area. And so they had built a fence around it so that to get to the ocean, you'd have to walk the opposite direction off the property and around this incredibly long fence to then get to the ocean side. And it would have been impossible given the situation. By the time that they left, actually, as they walked away from me, a ember that was like the size of like a small bush had flown over my head and fell between us and burst into flames. So there was like a wall of fire between us as they walked away. So they would not have had the time to walk around this fence.
Oh my God.
And I remember Atina was, trying to get through it. And then she went back and had a conversation with Freeman at his door. That's when she said, I'm going to stay with you then. But there had been a young boy with them as well who had said he wanted to help, but then kind of like left them behind. I don't know exactly what happened, but suddenly when she came back with Freeman, I just remember them walking away towards the ocean through an area where there had been a fence. And up until like moments before that, there had been a fence there. And I asked her later, I was like, Atina, I'm now realizing that you walked out with Freeman that direction. Like, did you bust down a fence to get him out of there? Like, my God, you strong woman. Like, did you break that fence down? And she said no, that it was there and she was worried about it. And then she walked away, talked to Freeman. And by the time she came back, the wind had blown the fence down in just the spot they needed to get through. And I personally believe that was the hand of God coming and pushing that fence.
Yeah,
down
that's a stroke of
no
luck
other
for
way.
sure.
Insane. And this whole story is riddled with moments like that where I just feel so blessed to be around the people I was with. I think they were strong and courageous and full of love and had the best intentions in their hearts. And I think without that, none of us would have made it. We relied on each other way too much in those moments and moments of fate like this. So she and Freeman walked, through this now non-existent fence towards Front Street, towards the ocean. And I got in my car and I had to drive first towards the fire to get out of the parking lot. And then I could kind of go on a parallel road for a block or two before I could actually get to the road that was right on the ocean. And that 2-block stretch of driving is one of the most harrowing moments of my life. As I began to drive, there was a little tiny bit of visibility. There was so much thick black smoke that I could see just a couple of feet in front of my car. But as I got onto the road and I got to the area that was much closer to the fire, it was pitch black and it kind of drove you crazy in your brain because your eyes are open. It's as if you closed your eyes. It's that black. It's like if you close your eyes and put your hands over them, it's the darkest void. There's no walls, there's no floor, there's no ceiling. It's just black, but your eyes are open and you're like trying to rub them and get even just a hint of light, a one pinhole of light to prove that your eyes are still even working. But there was nothing. And you're operating a motor vehicle on a road that has transformers in the road. There's cars parked on both sides that I can't see. There might be people on bikes. You don't even know what's in front of you and you can't see anything, but you have to go because there's fire like licking at your heels. So that was one of the scariest moments of my life where I realized I just had to go. And my biggest fear was that I would harm somebody else. And thank God there was nobody in front of me. In fact, for again, like another miracle reason, all of the debris that had been in the road prior from that morning, there had been a transformer down in the very road that I was evacuating on. It just wasn't there anymore. By the time that I went and drove over it, I mean, like, I know the county had been out trying to clear things, but like the biggest obstacle on my evacuation road that I knew I was coming up on just wasn't there. And so I just drove with muscle memory. It was a road that I was very used to. It was my home. And I would look for just sometimes as I would pass a parked car next to me, I would see like one little flash of a color of paint. And I could be like, oh, there's a red car right there. Okay, this is how far I am away from the side of the road. And I could kind of gauge based on that. But the first 2 blocks were harrowing. And by the time I got out of those 2 blocks and got down to where the ocean was, it was still very smoky, but I could see. And I was relieved until I realized that what I could see was just blocked traffic. It was just car after car after car. They were not only bumper to bumper, they were going the same direction in both lanes. Cars that were going on the sidewalk and on the grass around one another. I was so scared that somebody was going to have an accident in the road and block the road and then nobody could get through. At the moment, I had thought what we were experiencing was just the bottlenecking of having 2 roads come together to one road out, which is what was happening at the end of this road. There was 2 major roads coming together. And so I just assumed that there was like some zippering happening up, in front of me that was
they're
happening
working
slowly.
it out. They're trying to like slowly make their way through safely.
Right. Yeah, because we were creeping along, but I realized ultimately that the creeping along was actually just because cars were pulling out into different lanes, but nobody was actually moving up front. And during that time, a tourist, I think he was a tourist. His name was Naeem. He hopped into my car and we had just a very quick exchange. I asked him his name. I said, please be kind. I remember saying that. I was like, I'm just letting this strange man into my car. I don't know who he is. I just remember turning around saying, what's your name? Please be kind. I asked him where he had come from and he was explaining that the direction of the road that he had been traveling down, he's like, there's fire that direction. And he told me to turn up the mountain. And I was like, that's where I came from. And that's where the fire is coming from as well. So the only option is this road, but it's blocked and we don't know why. And it seems like there's a lot of smoke in front of us. And he started to kind of panic. He was very concerned about the smoke. For whatever reason, he was not concerned about the flames. He felt like he was going to die from the smoke. So I just kept encouraging him, like, stay in my car then. We have a closed air system, like, stay in here. You can breathe. We'll stay in here as long as we can until we absolutely have to. We have the ocean. We can do whatever. We can swim out if we have to. We'll find a way. But he was panicked. At one point, I told him, like, I'm not holding you hostage, man. You do what's good for you. We are all in this to survive. This is what I want to do. I'm not going to take my car up the mountain. I'm going to stay right here. If you want to jump out and jump in somebody else's, do whatever you need to do. And he jumped out of the car and he ran forward and disappeared into the smoke that was in front of us. And I sat there and panicked for like 30 seconds, a minute, being like, oh my God, he just disappeared and he's not coming back. Like, he's not turning around. I thought he was just going to run right back. And after about a minute, he did. He came back out of the smoke and he ran up to my car and he pounded on the window and I rolled it down and he said, it's all fire up there. It's all flames.
Oh my
and
God.
And so I told him to get back in the car, but he was like, absolutely not. And he turned around and he ran back the direction that he came. And I didn't see him again that night, didn't see him in any shelter afterwards. Also didn't see his name on any of the scary lists of people who passed. But that's one of my biggest open-ended questions at the end of this is I wish I knew how the rest of his evening had played out because I hold him deeply in my heart after that short encounter that we had.
Yeah, some of the briefest encounters you have with strangers can stick with you for so long, especially in that kind of circumstance.
Yeah, trauma bonding is what they call it. It's like this deep, instant connection over something that that only you share. Only people right here, right now, even understand this, and you have to rely on each other. So I wish I'd known what happened to him. I've done a lot of research, but unfortunately, I'm not sure exactly what happened with the rest of his story. I think one of the things that I attribute a lot of my success to on that night is I had done a lot of safety training in my jobs prior. Working on boats, you do a lot of Coast Guard training. Working with wild exotic animals, you do a lot of safety training. And there's lessons that get drilled into you that you don't even realize how much they affect other situations. But man, it's that practice. It's doing something over and over again and reciting it and just thinking about it a lot. It becomes second nature. And I didn't even realize until later what had inspired this next choice that I made. But on boats, when you abandon ship, one of the things that they say is unless there's a fire or something going on that boat, if you're just taking on water, you want to leave that boat when you are stepping up into your life raft. You don't want to step down into a life raft. So you don't want to get off your boat while it's still floating in the water. You are waiting till that boat is like going down. You're starting to get your toes wet is when you get into your life raft. And the ocean was my life raft that night. I think I knew the moment that I was surrounded on three sides by fire and just had the ocean to my other side, that was going to be where I would end up that night.
Could I just ask what the reason is behind stepping up into the life raft? Is it just making sure that the boat is no longer an option for your safety?
Your best chance of survival is on the biggest vessel that you have with the most supplies. You're not sure if there's going to be some air pocket or something that's going to ultimately keep your boat floating, but just barely. And if you can stay attached to your radio or your freshwater supply or even just a mirror that you had on board,
the
as
majority
a
of your
device,
resources are on that vessel.
Large debris. Yeah, you want to be around the debris field. Like there's reason to be close to that vessel. There's signals that happen. There's an EPIRB, a device that signals your location. But if you hop off in your life raft the second that something starts going bad, then your boat's going to be pinging a mile away from you that there's a problem and you've drifted away at that point. So there's a lot of reasons to just like, so you stay close to your boat. You want to wait till the last second to make a decision, like floating at the ocean's whim with no resources. That's a big decision to make. It seems small when you're like, well, my boat's going down. I'm going to jump on the safe boat. But that safe boat is actually so dangerous because you have nothing. You've lost all of your tools there. And so I didn't even notice at the time that that was so deeply ingrained into me. But my plan, as I realized that I was stuck, I was like, I'm not going anywhere. There is fire in front of me. There is not one more car that will be going through. I pulled my car up onto the grass on the side of the road, my thought being that if at some point things cleared up after I got in the ocean, because I knew I was going to choose the ocean. I was a marine biologist, ex-dolphin trainer, free diver by choice. I loved the ocean. I couldn't think of a more comforting place to be, honestly, in that moment than the ocean, which is funny because so many people have a fear of it. I'm better in the ocean than on land on a good day. It's my home. And so I immediately was like, I'm full sending it into the ocean. I know I can survive there. I'm used to those conditions. So I will choose ocean. And so I pulled my car off to the side of the road in the hopes that if the road cleared up, that somebody behind me would still be able to get a car through later or something. And I decided in my mind that I was going to stay in my car for as long as possible, circulating just the clean air that I had in my car. And my go moment, the moment that I was going to get into my life raft, the ocean, was going to be when the building that was next to me, just a couple feet away from me, when I saw active flames, not just embers, but when I saw a flame on that building, it was going to be my time to go. Because at that point, you don't know if it's going to explode or if my car is going to catch or something. And so it was time. At that point, I knew it was time to choose breathing smoky air because that was going to be even safer than being next to the fire. In that time that I was waiting, I saw Freeman and Atina, my neighbors, make it on foot. Freeman's shirt had been really badly burnt because embers had been falling on him. They actually caught him on fire while they were walking down the street. And Atina had been able to put him out and get him all the way down the road to where I was. So I got out of the car for a little bit to help him get over the rock wall. And we took a second and wet his shirt, wet all of our shirts, helped a couple of the kids around us wring shirts over their heads and their hair so their hair wasn't going to catch fire, make sure people were breathing through wet masks, and just trying to help people because there was families, parents that had multiple kids they were trying to control, or elderly folks that had low mobility. And we took a moment to kind of help people. And then I told Atina, I want to stay in my car for air. Like, you're welcome to join me in here. But she was nervous that they were going to have trouble getting Freeman over the wall later on. And she just wanted him on this other side of this rock wall that was keeping, us divided from the road and the ocean.
And there was no beach below the wall. It was just drop off into water.
So there's like a little tiny bit of rocky coastline. When it's high tide, there's no coast at all. When there's low tide, there's maybe 10 feet of coast, maybe 5 to 10 feet, depending on where you're at. And so on that particular night, there was enough rocks there where you could kind of sit on the rocks rather than just swim in the ocean. But even as you were sitting on the rocks, there was waves hitting you. So you were exposed to all the elements of the ocean, even as you were just sitting there. But you weren't necessarily like treading water once you hopped over. In fact, where I stayed all night, when I talk about being in the ocean that night, we made a conscious decision to not drift out far. We did not want to have our feet leave the ground because it was nighttime. There was a heavy current, rough seas, murky water. And I don't want to put the fear in anybody of shark attacks because in a normal situation, as a marine biologist by trade, I don't typically have a fear of that. I'm a free diver. I see sharks all the time. I dove with sharks for fun in a hurricane in the Bahamas because it was a cool life experience. I love sharks. But that is the worst situation to be in, is in murky, surfy water at the time of day where they're feeding, when there's a lot of people panicked in the water.
And they may have cuts and scrapes on them too.
It was not the place to be in the water. And also, it's nighttime and there's smoke on the water. So if you drift out and the current starts to take you away, even if they want to come and find you and they send out rescue boats, it's not like you brought a life jacket with you. You're not reflective and orange and bright. You're cold. There's smoke all around you. So the visibility stinks. You don't have a light with you or anything. So super dangerous. And so what we chose to do when we got in the water was to basically like lay on our bellies and kind of just like get into the point of water. It was like a shallow bathtub where it was covering our whole body so that the embers weren't falling on us and burning us as badly, but that we could still control the situation. The cost of that was the waves were breaking on us all night long. And so we got roughed up in the surf and smashed against the rocks all night. But we just wanted a sense of control, something that we were in control of that night because we lost so much control of everything else. To be able to say, like, I have my feet on land and I can choose at any moment if I want to go more towards the water for clean air away from the smoke, or if I want to go more towards the land to get away from the threats of the water. And so that's kind of the sweet spot that we stayed in. So after we had kind of gotten Freeman set up, I went back to my car for a few moments until the building beside me caught on fire. And in those few moments, I had gone through my go bag that I had packed, and I realized that I wasn't going to be able to take all of the things with me into the ocean. It was too big. It was bulky. I'd thrown in like my work computer. I knew that wasn't going to survive. So sorry, work, if you're listening, left the computer behind, left a couple of like other like bulky things that weren't as sentimental behind. I was really hopeful still at that point. Nobody knew how this day was going to play out. I was hoping that at some point the fire would get less extreme by the time it got to us, that by the time it had burned through the whole town, the strength of it would go down in some way or something. And I was hoping that, my car would be safe still, that the buildings may burn, but that our cars would be okay. I had brought my pet bird with me. It was a baby. It was a 12-day-old bird that I had rescued and was hand raising. And it's been kind of a running joke with my friends that I was like the bird rescue person on island. I had taken care of so many birds as my job that when my friends would find birds fallen out of nests or anything, they would always bring them to me because I was comfortable caring for animals like that.
That's amazing.
So I had raised so many birds, and I'd always said that this one species, it's called a mynah bird, was my dream bird they're an invasive species. So I always told myself that if I found one that needed my help, that it would be my pet. I would not release it back into the wild because they're invasive. They look like starlings or something, but they can mimic speech like parrots. And so they're very smart birds. And I was stoked to have finally found a little myna bird, and I was raising it, and he was so strong and beautiful. I named him Chickadee because I love to name birds after the wrong species. I think it's a very funny thing to do. So I used to have a little parakeet named Chicken. So this one was Chickadee. And I loved this little bird, even though it was only 12 days old. Like, I had been waiting for that bird for so many years. I was so excited. And I got slammed online after this, actually, because I had mentioned that I left my bird in my car. And people are like, how dare you, birds can fly. You should have opened a window and let it go. The bird didn't have feathers, so it couldn't have flown. So I'm, not intentionally cruel leaving my pet behind. It was
Yeah, I
precious
mean,
little pet.
if you'd taken it outside, the smoke or fire would have gotten to it. Inside, it at least had breathable
Exactly.
air.
That was my thought entirely. Is like, a baby bird's not going to survive in the ocean, and I can take more smoke than it can. So I'm going to leave it in the fresh air and hope that it stays. And so with my last 5 minutes or so in my car, I spent it holding my bird and feeding it one last meal, because I was thinking to myself, like, it's dinner time and it was supposed to be eating, and the birds have to eat every couple of hours, and I didn't know how long I'd have to be in the ocean, and I just wanted it to have a full belly, so when I came back, it wasn't hungry. And what a ridiculous way to spend a couple minutes. But honestly, I feel glad that I did. It was nice to share that moment. And then once that building caught on fire, I took all my things and I hopped over the rock wall myself and kind of began the rest of the ordeal for that night. Right away, once we got over the rock wall, we realized that the building that was burning across the street from us wasn't casting as much embers on us because the rock wall was kind of protecting us a little bit. But there was a building that was kind of down the coast from us that had been built out sort of on like a little pier. It was an old Bubba Gump's restaurant, and it was all wood and built onto this pier, and it began to burn. And all of those embers were on the same side of the rock wall as us, and they were just burning down the coastline at us. And it was so hard to see. You couldn't open your eyes because it would burn your eyeballs. And as I look at my scars that I have all over my body now, you can tell very clearly that my left side is much more burned than my right side, because that was the side that was facing that particular building as it was burning, and it was just raining embers down on us. And even when we were wet, it would boil the water and then burn you.
Oh my God.
It was crazy. And one of the things that shocks me the most when I go back now and I look at videos, there's a few things that stand out to me. One is that the videos of the spot where I was at, you'll see people clinging onto rocks right by the ocean. There's waves. You see the cars behind them that are a big part of the story as well. The videos are pretty obvious when you see them online. Like, we were the only people in the water almost. What stands out to me, if you choose to watch those videos, is all of them are from before the cars began to explode around us, because after that, nobody focused on anything but surviving. It was also very dark after that. And so all of the videos you see, it looks very light out. You have to realize that that was within probably the first half hour of our ordeal. And then after that, it is like radio silence. There is no media portraying the rest of the night because we were all in a fight for survival. The videos that you see that people are horrified about online doesn't even begin to cover the actual experience. That was just us looking around being like, wow, this is pretty crazy, huh? And it got so much worse than that. Even at that moment when they were being recorded, when I look at the videos, you can see things. Like, cameras could see through the smoke better than the human eye actually could. The smoke was much more thick as you were looking through it with your own eyes, and you have to squint your eyes all the time. So everything's blurry. You're looking out through a small crack in your eyes. And I think that's one of the things that I hadn't realized about the threat of being stuck in fire is, like, that the air is going to get thick and it will be harder to breathe, but you lose all of your senses. It drives you kind of crazy. You want to look around to know what's going to burn you next, but you can't even open your eyes, or else it will be your eyes that burn. And that's like a really tough situation to be stuck in, where you're like feeling around, trying to like opening your eyes for 1 second at a time, like a little strobe, just trying to take in the world like that. And so the videos were weird to me going back and watching those, because that was not what my experience felt like. And it was also such like a downplaying of the entirety of the situation, because it was really just as we were settling in and trying to take in our surroundings that there's actually footage captured. So most of the night, as the fire was taking the buildings, me and Atina tried to stay as close to Freeman as we could. He was not going to move on the rock wall at all, but Atina and I had been talking about some strategy on like how we could move up and down the rock wall a little bit based on how the fire was burning, so that we weren't right next to the hottest part of the fire at any moment. as the building across from us burned, as the fire was moving from the left to the right, we would move from the right to the left down that building so that we were always on the opposite side of the building from the fire if we could be. But it was hard because we wanted to also stay close to Freeman. And so for the beginning, we were kind of just moving like 10 feet this way and that way, just so that we were kind of staying out of the big plumes of smoke and trying to minimize our burns, but stay close to him as well. And I think we hit a point where we were exhausted and it was a lot. We were hurting, our bodies were sore, but we had a routine. Like we were getting used to putting out embers quickly, extinguishing our bags, keeping our masks wet. And the fire had really reached its pinnacle. And I think there was a piece of me that thought we had gotten through the worst of this until we started to hear these explosions coming down the road towards us. They started really, really far away, and it was just like little pops way out in the distance, and it didn't catch our attention at first. And then they started to kind of get closer, and they were getting like exponentially more. It was like 1 or 2 pops, and then there was 8, and then there was 20, and then as it was getting closer, there was just like more and more, and the explosions were getting louder. Where you were like, that's not just pieces of debris falling or buildings collapsing piece by piece. These are explosions that are happening, and they're coming closer to us. And it took us a little while to realize that it was the cars. Cars were beginning to catch on fire, though it took them much longer than the buildings because obviously buildings are wood and more flammable. But once the cars started to go, it was like a chain reaction. They were like dominoes because the cars were either parked bumper to bumper, or we were in this traffic of, this line of cars that were all bumper to bumper. So this fire was spreading between them really, really quickly. And I remember talking with Atina and just being like, we're standing on the other side of a wall from 50 parked cars. They are 5 feet away from our heads right now. And what's between us is a rock that could fall down and crush us. This is really, really bad. There's nowhere to go unless we like really took off into the ocean, which we had been talking about just not wanting to do. And so I had found one spot along the rock wall that was the biggest gap between 2 parked cars that there was on the entire street. So most of the cars were like truly bumper to bumper. And then there was this one set of cars that had like 2 feet of a gap between them. And I was like, we need to go sit in between those 2 cars because at least it's not a car exploding directly behind our head. It's as far away as we can physically get from a car that's exploding. We have to shoot for that gap. But it was like 20, 25 feet away from Freeman. And we were torn. It was the hardest moral dilemma of like wanting to be 20 feet away, but then also wanting to be with him so badly and knowing we couldn't like get him to go those 20 feet with us. And he told us to go and encouraged us strongly. And I remember telling Atina, like, we have to take this chance because we need to be strong for him. Like if we're going to be picking him up out of here later to get him back over this rock wall, like who knows what the rest of this night looks like. Like we have to take care of ourselves. That's like the, cardinal rule is like put your oxygen mask on first so that you can help other people.
Absolutely.
And so we decided to go like, just 20 feet down the rock wall and kind of situate ourselves between those 2 cars as the cars around us started to explode. And that portion of the night was by far the scariest, most horrifying, perilous part of our night. I can't even explain like how loud it is. 1 car explosion is a lot, but like 100, one by one by one, the entire ground would just shake, like earthquake after earthquake. There was debris flying over our heads into the water. And some of the debris, not just from the cars, but the fire in general, like you would get these flaming pieces of debris that were very large, huge pieces of things that could like knock you out if they hit you. They would hit the water and they were burning so hot, they wouldn't go out even in the ocean. So then the waves would be washing burning debris into you. So you'd have to like spend half your time splashing the things that fell into the water around you to kind of extinguish them. But even then the water would start to like boil and get like hot around you. It was
Oh my
the
God.
weirdest.
It must have been like hell on earth, like no hyperbole, like literally everything in front of you is fire.
And this was hours of this. This is not like a 30-minute ordeal. It's like at this point, we're probably 3 or 4 hours into this.
So it's night by now, right? It's evening?
It's nighttime, yeah. It's a little bit before 9 o'clock that all of this was happening. And the cars going off, it was not only scary because the explosions, but the gases that they released, the fumes coming off of the car explosion was the most noxious chemically fumes that we experienced all night. The rest of the smoke was uncomfortable, that it was just that, carcinogenic probably, and something that I now have to fear with my medical health for the rest of my life. But I didn't actually ever feel like I was going to die from the smoke inhalation. It was uncomfortable, but I never felt lightheaded. I didn't feel faint. I maybe was like moving a little bit slower, just out of precaution, but it was survivable. What was not survivable was the fumes that were coming off of the cars. I remember feeling really lightheaded and really, really weird and saying to Atina, like, we should go back to Freeman. And we both stood up and we tried to walk and we made it less than 5 feet. We both collapsed. We couldn't breathe. And I was like, we need to stay here, catch your breath, no talking. And we like promised each other the first second we wouldn't talk and we would just squeeze each other's hands and just remind each other that way that like we were here. And at some point, I remember trying to say something to her despite our agreement. And when I tried to speak, I didn't have a voice. It's like I had been to 18 rock concerts every night for like like a month. I had no voice whatsoever. It was like my vocal cords didn't work. They just seized up and I couldn't speak. I started feeling crazy and was just like trying to say something to Atina and like gasp and sputter out like a little bit of breath. And she realized I was struggling and tried to say something back to me. And the exact same thing happened to her. And we were both sitting there like miming at each other, like, oh my God, I can't speak. We don't have voices anymore. It was crazy. That I'm glad to say went away as soon as the air cleared. So there was something in the fumes. It wasn't just like the overall smoke exposure throughout the night. It was something in the air in that moment. But that's when we were like, this is very, very, very bad. And we started like reminding each other to stay alive at that point. We were both starting to lose consciousness quite frequently. I've reported this differently in different tellings of this because I don't want people to think I'm a crazy person or that I am going to like full send into beliefs that I'm just unsure of, but I had a near-death experience in that moment. I saw something that a lot of people would say are just hallucinations, low oxygen, lots of things you could explain it with. I will just say as somebody that lived it, it was none of those things. It is the closest to death I have ever been and had a very, very spiritual experience, one that was actually incredibly calming. As the cars a little bit further away started to explode and the fumes hit us and I started to lose consciousness, I stopped being able to hear. So the cars that exploded right behind me, I never heard. I don't know why. It sounded like popcorn going off, is what I told Atina later. And she agreed with me that it was like the sound went from deafening booms to like this little pop in the distance. I found a lot of peace in that. And where I was in that moment was with people I loved and having a moment that was beautiful. And it wasn't until later that that moment scared me as much as it did. Because in the moment, I felt like I was in the hands of God. I didn't know what was going to happen. And I was just so okay with it. And Atina had a lot of similar experiences. She also lost consciousness during that time multiple times. And I would call her out of the blue and be like, make me feel not crazy. This happened, right? Like this thing that I remember and I'm like, it's coming back to mind. Like that happened, right? And she'd be like, yeah, that happened. And we would confirm a lot of pieces of our stories together. There was a couple pieces of her story from that time of the night that I don't remember. And they were big events. Like an entire fight happened next to me that I am unaware ever happened. Somebody who was having kind of a withdrawal situation in that moment was kind of losing it. I had no idea. So that was the most surreal part of the night where things get very confusing for me. I lost a lot of time. Suddenly it was later in the night. I don't remember how that happened. When I gained consciousness fully and felt alert again, the air was clear. The cars had stopped exploding. The fire had pretty much completely burned out. The buildings were all collapsed. There was just like embers left in them. And I remember peeking up over the rock wall and just looking out and being like, it's gone. Lahaina is gone. And I told that to Atina. I told her like, it's done. It's over. We survived. And she looked at me and was like, you are shaking. And I didn't realize until she said it out loud that I was extremely hypothermic, probably very dangerously so. And I was shaking like a leaf. And so I decided to climb back up over the rock wall and go huddle next to the embers of the burning Waikiki brewery. Like such a surreal moment to like choose to jump in the ocean from a fire, choose to go into the fire from the ocean. Just what a weird situation. And I also felt just so blessed, especially after this kind of like spiritual experience I'd had. I just remember feeling like gratitude for having the tools I needed to survive. When there was a fire, I had ocean. When I had hypothermia, there was fire. There's something beautiful about that, despite the fact that it's, horrible choices to be stuck between. So I warmed up next to the fire. And once I was warmed up, my first thought was, I have to check on Freeman. And so I jumped up and I told Atina I wanted to go check on him. And I began to walk down the rock wall on the street side of it because it was easier to navigate than on the rocks. And she began to walk towards him on the rock wall side. So she was making much slower progress than I was towards him. And as I got closer to him, I realized pretty quickly that he had passed. I have unfortunately responded to deaths prior. I had responded to my own father's death. I had worked on a boat where unfortunately people had passed away due to cardiac issues in the water. So I've experienced that before. And as soon as I saw him, my heart sank. because I knew we had lost a pillar of Lahaina's community and somebody that we had been trying to save so desperately that night. Um, and like, racking my brain, like thinking about like the last moment I saw him, he was giving us a little shaka, thumb and pinky out, saying like, "Hey, it's cool. Go down that rock wall. Like, I'm gonna be right here. I'm good." And I remember him saying that all night, like, "I'm good." You'd look at him and smile and give you a shock. "I'm good," which is crazy because he was not good. There was nothing good about that situation, and yet like his attitude was always like, "No, no, no, we're fine. This is good." And to have him gone was heartbreaking. It made me realize not only was this life or death, and I could have died, and people I loved are now dead because of this. But I think it was the first moment I realized, oh my God, there are more people in this town that just died. There are people that did not get out of this. And it kind of sank in that, like, oh my God, this is just the first person I know, but this is about to be so big. Just looking out over this debris field, and it's the entire town. That included senior homes and apartments that I knew were full of some of our kapuna, our elderly residents of our town. And I didn't know what to do. And I still saw Tina making her way towards me, and I kind of had another one of those moments of like, you put your oxygen mask on first. Like, we still have to survive. We're still sitting on a rock wall in a burning downtown next to the ocean. We don't know if people know we're here. We still have to get through this. And full sending panic or grief right now is not going to get us safer quicker. And that's actually not better for Freeman either. My biggest heartbreaking part was that I wanted to give him CPR. I'm CPR trained, but I knew that there was nowhere flat to put him. I would have been doing CPR on sharp rocks, which wouldn't have worked. And after just going through all that oxygen deprivation, I didn't think I had the strength to actually give good CPR, and that the process of doing that would leave me so drained that like I might not be ready for the next thing that came up that we would have to overcome. And that was heartbreaking. But we also didn't even know when he had passed, didn't know if that would have done anything at all. And so I knew that we couldn't do anything, and I wanted to save Atina the burden of like seeing what I had just seen. And so I walked up to her before she could get to him and just said, Freeman's not responding to me. And that means one of two things. Either he's not with us anymore. And if that's the case, there's nothing we can do. And we have to focus on getting us out of here so that we can tell someone what happened here and we can bring him to his family. That's important. Or he's unconscious like we just were, and he is asleep. And if he is, let that man rest, because nobody deserves to see this. And if he found a moment of rest, it's very late at night now. It's like, let him rest. We will let him rest. And I think in her brain, it kind of left her at like, okay, he's resting. I think in our hearts, we both knew, but it allowed us to just focus on the matters at hand. I, at that point, pulled out my cell phone, which had survived this entire ordeal. Tina had lost hers in the ocean, but mine had made it. And before I got out of my car, I had tried to send a couple of text messages to my mom and my boss, and I wasn't fully sure if all of them had gone through. I'd gotten a couple of them through, but I wasn't really sure. But when I'd gotten over the rock wall, Atina had lent me her phone. She had like 1 bar of signal, and I was able to call my mom for about 15 seconds and tell her that what was happening, that I was going into the ocean. And while I was on the phone, I can't believe I didn't mention this earlier. This might be something to edit in earlier in the podcast. But while I was on the phone, this woman named Michelle, who I didn't know at the time, but now I know intimately, came running up in hysterics. Her father was on the other side of the wall of fire that was blocking us from evacuating. And he was in one of the senior homes over there. He was waiting for her to evacuate. He wasn't going to leave until she got there. She was on her way to pick him up, and then they were going to leave together. And now there was a wall of fire between them, and she was panicked that he was going to just stay there and that he needed to leave, but she couldn't get a hold of him. So she saw me on the phone with my mom and came running up. She's like, give me your phone. Give me your phone. I was like, it's not mine, but here. I was like, Mom, I got to go. I'm good. I'll call you when I can. I love you so much. Like, goodbye. Hung up, handed the phone to Michelle, who called her father and told him to go. And then she got off the phone and she was with her husband. And I remember he looked exhausted because she was panicking in the worst way, the worst kind of panic you could have. And she was ready to run into that fire after her dad. And I remember after she got off the phone, I grabbed her by both shoulders. I said, what's your name? She said, Michelle. I said, Michelle, here's the deal. I am planning on living tonight. I'm going to live. And if you want to live, my best recommendation is to stay with me, because I'm going to live tonight. I think you should stay with me, but I'm going to need you to take a breath and calm down, because this is going to take a while. So calm down, stay with me. And I remember she like visibly came down a notch. I think she just wanted somebody else to take control. And she didn't stay like right next to us all night, but she stayed close to us all night long. And Atina would always remind us whenever the wind shifted to like look the other way and breathe or cough out the stuff that you're breathing in. And she always included Michelle and Kevin in that as well. And later on, after we evacuated and got into the shelters, everything, I found Michelle again later, and she told me that her father had gotten out, and she was so grateful to me that I had saved her life. And so that was a really cool moment. Of anybody that I encountered that night, I really feel like I actually did have some impact on how her night went, and I'm really, really grateful that I did. So I had gotten to speak to my mom for just a couple of seconds before I gave the phone to Michelle. And after all of this ordeal, I turned on my phone and I actually had 16% of my battery left and just enough service to make a call. And so I called, I don't actually remember if I called my mom or 911 first.
Yeah.
They were both on my mind. But those were my two calls. I called my mom and I called 911, and I kept it short with my mom and just said, like, I'm alive. It's not good. Everything's gone. My place is gone. The town is gone. I've probably just lost my job. I've lost everything, but I'm alive and I'm still in the ocean. I don't know when I will get out of here. It might not be till the morning, but I'm safe. Go to sleep. It's
Yeah.
late. She was like up all night. I was like, I'm okay. And then I called 911 and I told them where we were. And I think one of the hard moments of that night is getting through to 911 and hearing a voice and being like, oh my God, I'm actually talking to a rescue person right now. And there's no more fire around us, which means they can help us. Like, they can get us out of here. Thank God this is over. And when I talked to them, I explained, like, there's a lot of us out here. There was somewhere around 100 people when we started that night. By the end, there was about 40 of us there. The others had drifted off into the ocean. Some of them had gone up the coastline in the water, and we found out later had been evacuated or had been rescued up the shore on one of the beaches. Some people were rescued out of the water. People had gotten spread out. By the end, there was about 40 of us there on the shore ready to be rescued. So we told them there's this big group of us and we're stuck. The fire's burned. It's not easy to get to us, but it's not dangerous to get to us anymore. So can we get some help, please? And she told me that she already knew we were there. People had been calling, but that there was nothing that they could do. There was still so much fire going on in the town. All the resources were strapped. They didn't know how to get to us. There was Coast Guard in the water, and they were trying to figure out if they could bring one of the boats close enough to shore to rescue people that way. It was going to be a while, but they knew we were there. And from that point until we actually got rescued, it was probably another 3 hours or so. In that 3 hours, we watched this boat that was out there trying to rescue us pick up a lot of people from the water. And then I noticed, because I'm a mariner myself, I could see the silhouettes of the boats and I could very clearly tell which one was the Coast Guard boat. But then at some point, a sailing catamaran pulled up next to them. And like, the Coast Guard does not use sailing catamarans. Those are pleasure boats. Those are tour boats in Hawaii. And I could actually recognize the boat. It was one of our competitors, but one of the people that we worked with out of the same harbor. And it's a commercial boat. It's people like myself. And so some of them had gone out and saved their boat. They had gotten it out of the harbor, riding out the fire on the water. And they had joined up with the Coast Guard and were trying to help rescue us, to the point where when the Coast Guard was concerned, didn't know if they could come into the shore or not, the other boat with just citizens, just people that were also from Lahaina and cared, they were the ones that ended up jumping on surfboards and paddling into the shore to start pulling people out one by one out to the water, when the Coast Guard wasn't even doing that. The response of our community after the fire was the only thing that kept our community going, because we did not get the help that we needed from various entities that should have been helping. I remember being so sad when I thought that my only option was to get on a surfboard to get out of there, because I had my IKEA bag full of these papers, all of my tickets and my receipts and these things that I had loved. I was the only one that still had a bag at the end of all of this. Everybody else had lost it to the ocean, lost it to fire, had just given up on it, didn't even want it anymore. Like, so many different moods and feelings. And I had these precious things still, and I just did not want to get on a surfboard and ruin it all. And so I remember telling Atina that I'm not getting on a surfboard, and that if I had to sit on this rock wall until the sun came up tomorrow and then walk my way out, I will just do that. I would rather do that than ruin what I have here. And I could stay all night. Like, I've gotten through the worst of it. I can stay here all night. I'll sleep on this rock wall. And it was right about that time that I saw emergency lights finally down the road from us. It was the first emergency vehicle I'd seen all night, which is crazy, because at this point we're like 8 hours into a fire that burned down my entire town. And I didn't even see one single fire truck that whole night. Granted, how could they have gotten to us? But it's just, you don't think about that. You assume if a disaster strikes that somebody will come and help you at some point, and they'll just come in and clean up the aftermath. It's the reality of some of these situations. So we saw emergency lights, but we didn't know if they were coming for us. And there was this young guy that was running towards one of the surfboards. He wanted to get the heck out of there. I started shouting as he was running by, does anybody have like a headlamp or a flashlight? Can we start flashing SOS at those emergency vehicles down the road so that they know people are here? They're looking for us. I want them to know where we are quickly. Let's just get out of here. And I remember this kid that was running towards the surfboard just chucked this headlamp at me. He was like, I don't even want this anymore, and threw it at me. And then jumped on a surfboard and paddled away. And I still have his headlamp. If he ever wants it back, feel free to email me. But he handed me his headlamp and I started flashing SOS at the trucks, and they pretty quickly came our direction, but then couldn't make it all the way down to us. They had to jump out, hike down to us because there was so much debris in the road, so much glass, so many down lines, cars with their aluminum rims just melted to the ground. So there was also like pools of melted metal just like running through the road. I had given my shoes to Atina because she had lost some and she was struggling a little bit more on the rocks than I was. And so it was like scary walking on these roads with the hot metal, barely any light. It was kind of intense. And so they had to park pretty far out and then hike into us. And they started breaking us up into groups of 10 or so and walked us back out to their emergency vehicles. The plan was that they were going to take us to a bus that was parked up the highway, and that bus was going to take us to the shelters. And on the way to the bus, we got trapped in another fire.
Oh my God.
The highway got closed because of a house that was burning. It was the brightest fire I had seen all night. And I was shocked at like just how bright it was. And I commented on that to Atina and I was like, look how bright that house is burning compared to all the other ones. Like that house is burning hard. She laughed and said, yeah, that's the tiki carver's house. The guy that they carve all the wood tiki statues. So their entire house was just a tinderbox. And so they couldn't ultimately get us through that fire to the bus for rescue. They had to put us in a Safeway parking lot for another 2 hours or so. I had one of the funniest moments of my night there where in retrospect, I look back and I'm like, what were you thinking? But I was so tired. We had been doing this for hours. Your body hurts. You know, you're swimming, you're fighting off burns, you're trying to run, you can't breathe. Like there's all these things happening in such a short period of time and you're trying to process all that, but you're also just tired. It's after midnight. It's been a really long day. And I remember just wanting to sleep so badly and looking around me and realizing that there's still fire on all sides of me. And I was like, I really shouldn't sleep right now. Like there's still a fire in every direction of me right now. And then I was just like, it's like at least 2 blocks away in every direction. I'm fine. And I went to sleep. I slept because 2 blocks away.
That's enough distance
like,
between you.
Oh, that's good. That's
death.
fine.
Yeah,
I'm good.
God.
Which is crazy to think about now that you could see a fire 2 blocks away bearing down on you and just be like, I'll deal with that in 20 minutes. So I took a 20-minute nap and woke up and spent a little time just kind of commiserating with some of the people that had been there with us. And we also just spent a lot of time just kind of sitting in silence, just like staring at the floor, like what just happened. Eventually the fire cleared up and they brought the trucks back to come and pick us up. And the last crazy part of that night, and then if you want to cover anything after the fire, we can't. There is some other stuff. But the last crazy part of that night, actually, there's a couple crazy parts, but in the fire truck after they picked us up for that final time in the parking lot, we were parked for a second because they were trying to get all of these were like pickup trucks, not like full fire trucks. They're like almost like personal vehicles for firefighters, but they were just packing us into like the flatbeds in the back. So there were like 10 people that were just kind of shoved into these pickup trucks essentially. And they were getting them all lined up so that all of the vehicles could kind of travel together so that if we got stuck in a fire again, at least there was like a unit of us together. And so we were in the first vehicle and they were kind of getting the other vehicles like lined up, getting all the people loaded up and sort of ready to go behind us. And as we were sitting there, my seat started to get hotter and hotter and hotter until the point I was like, oh no, there's a fire under our car. So the firefighter was like on his radio talking to people, trying to coordinate stuff. And I was like, I'm so sorry, but I think there's a fire under us. He was like, what? I was like, I think there's a fire burning under your vehicle. Like my seat is so hot, I can barely sit on it. It's starting to really hurt me. And so he like pulled the car forward a couple of feet and like looked behind us and there's no fire. And my situation didn't change at all. The car didn't start to cool down. And I was like, is there like an engine problem? Is there something happening? And like the woman next to me was like, sit up for a second, let me feel it. And so I sat up and she touched my seat. And then she just looked at me with like the saddest expression on her face. And she goes, your seat's not hot. And I was like, what do you mean it's not hot? Like I feel like I'm burning alive. And I put my hand down and she was right. Like my seat was not hot at all. And that's when I realized I had been so badly burnt over the course of the night, sitting on these rocks that had been slowly heating up all night. I had completely burned off all of that skin without even realizing it.
Oh my
And it
God.
wasn't until like the adrenaline had started calming down that I was sitting there and I was feeling the burn starting to set in. And I realized like, oh my God, I'm burning and there's nothing I can do about it. And that was like a hard moment of like, wow, this sucks. Like, this is going to be much worse than I thought. Like, I obviously have more injuries than I'm even aware of. And it took me that long. It took me that many hours into the night to even realize like I was so badly hurt, which is just crazy. And I will never forget the looks on people's faces when they realized as well, like, you're really hurt. And I don't know how to tell you, like, there's nothing you can do to stop that pain right now. As we were traveling towards the bus, we started to run into people that weren't with us that night. So for most of the night, I was so used to seeing this group of survivors. These were the people that made it out of the fire with me. And it seemed like there was nobody else in the town. Like there was no other pockets of these people. It was like this one huge group of us that had all made it to this one area. And otherwise, it's either like you got out earlier or you didn't survive. And we were like the survivors. But as we were driving down the highway, we started to see this kind of trickle out of like random individuals who had also survived on their own in really crazy ways. And we were just picking people up off the side of the road. And the craziest one that really stood out to me is we're driving down the highway and there's this man standing on the side of the road and he's bleeding out of his head. He's like stumbling, he's like staggering around and he's like gushing blood out of his head. And the firefighter pulls up, he's like, hey man, like you look like you could use a lift. And the guy turns around and he was so calm, but he goes, yeah, it's crazy. I just woke up in a 3-floor building and my house was completely on fire. And I looked outside and everything was on fire. So I just jumped out the window.
Oof.
And he's just walking down the highway after like waking up to this. He like didn't know, just went to bed, woke up to this. And then like his house is on fire and just jumped out the window, gashed his head open, and then just wandering down the highway being like, hope someone picks me up. Imagine you go through that and then you go outside and there's nobody even there to yell help to. Like everyone's just gone. You're like, what, like what apocalypse just happened that there's nobody even here? And like, that wasn't even a lone decision. Like that's one of so many of those kinds of crazy stories. The lengths that people went to survive were unbelievable. And the choices that people had to make were unfathomable in any other circumstance. It's kind of crazy because I don't know if you're familiar with this, but a couple of years back in 2018, there was a text that went out for a nuclear missile attack in Hawaii.
I do remember that.
Where they said, yeah, so I was working on a boat with 110 people in my care when that happened. And it's crazy how similar that situation is in some ways, where you see like what people do when they panic. And that situation was so unloaded. It was such a fun way to look at it because nothing actually happened. There was no threat. Nobody got hurt. Nobody lost their life. No property was damaged. It was just a scare. We all got scared and then got over it. So you could almost look back and kind of laugh at like, what did you do? Like I had a friend who went and put champagne on ice. And I was like, girl, you had 16 minutes left. You wanted to ice it? Like that's when you start popping the corks. Like there's no time for ice anymore.
He's got 8 minutes to ice, then 8 minutes to drink.
Right.
Toast to a good
right.
life.
But it's like you start to see a little bit of people's personality and sort of what would you do? I had a friend who abandoned a multi-million-dollar boat so that she could go and hug a couple dogs because she thought we were all dead. But like joke's on her when all of a sudden life continued and now she was responsible for leaving a multi-million-dollar boat in a harbor she wasn't supposed to.
I would have made that move too, to be honest.
It was the right call. It was totally the right call. But you start to see these glimpses of like the wild decisions that you get. Like if you ask me like, would you ever jump out of a 3-story building in your house? You'd be like, no. And then suddenly it was a strong yes for this man on this day. And it's crazy how little it takes to push you to that spot.
Yeah.
Of like, I mean, it's a big fire, but like, it doesn't even take a second to decide. It's like, nope, I'm jumping out the window now.
Well,
like, it is what I'm doing. It's
burning alive is a horrific way to go.
They pull on that trope in movies and TV shows for a reason because it is truly the most horrifying thing. And I've realized that a lot. Actually, it's been very painful after the fire. It's hard to watch movies now because of the amount of times that they use fire as a scare tactic. And it's so traumatic for me now, but it's such a visceral fear of people's. It's so real. We all know that fear because it's so deep in our biology. It's a thing that they pull from because it's a horrifying way to die. And it forces you to make some crazy decisions. And that part is real. That part is not from movies. That part is real. And after the fire, a lot of videos came out of people in really, really bad situations that night. Some videos went onto the internet that honestly I wish hadn't gone onto the internet because I don't think the families of some of those people pictured in those videos needed to see some of those moments of the horror, the fear, the pain. I don't think that helps anybody heal. As much as you want people to understand the threat, I want people that listen to this to feel fear around something like this so that if something happens like this to them, they save themselves from it, that they do something about it. I want them to be scared, but I don't want them to visualize the things that happen because it is too scary. It is too much for people's psyches to actually hold. And I think one of the most painful things of living this experience versus being on the outside and watching this experience is after the fire, I was living in a shelter for months with other victims of this. And we all process things differently. We all heal differently. We all, seek to mend these wounds in different ways. And for some people, that's talking a lot. For some people, that's shutting down. For some people, that's doing a lot of research online. And in that process, you hear a lot, you see a lot. And I unfortunately heard stories and saw pictures and videos that will never make it into media because they cannot. And it is horrible what happened to people. I had a friend who tried to help somebody that they could not help. And that sounds so simple of like, oh, this person and I can't help them. And I won't even try, but I cannot express the grotesqueness of what happened and the fact that nobody should experience that in their life. Nobody should die that way, and nobody should have to witness that. And it's because of that situation, honestly, the fact that that person suffered the way they did, that the person who saw that is living with that, and also in processing it is telling it to other people who are now also living with that. I look to the people not that caused this. Nobody wanted this to happen. This was not arson. This was not a fire that was set. But there was things that people could have done to save us. And I hold them responsible for the atrocities that happened to people, the horror stories. Mine's a scary story, but there are horror stories that came out of this. And I am upset that they didn't sound a siren, that they didn't send an evacuation text. Just this week, there is a lot more coming out. I think this is a great time actually to talk about this story because this week they released a 400-page report detailing the actual what happened of that day. It's been all tied up until this point in lawsuits, the county versus the electric company trying to figure out fault. And ultimately, I'm realizing in reading this 400-page document, everybody's at fault. The power company turned back on the power after the lines were down. The government, the people in charge of our safety, the safety guy in our county was texting LOL at the end of every message he sent that entire night before at the end of the night, he finally was like, oh my God, it's actually kind of bad. I think I'm going to fly back home to Maui tomorrow because wait, this is actually kind of bad. But the whole night, as I'm sitting in the water watching my friends die, he was laughing, being like, that's pretty wild. What's going on in Lahaina, huh? And he's in charge of our safety. He resigned immediately after the fire. And now I know why, because his texts are coming out and what he did is unspeakable. So I now look at those people with anger, not blame, but anger, because they could have done something and they chose not to. And as a result of their negligence, more people suffered than had to in a situation that was unpreventable, but could have been intervened on. And I think that's why it's an important story to talk about, because there is a false sense of safety everywhere in this world. Even if you live in a place that has a low likelihood of disaster, climate change is coming. That will change. You will have increased risk of something. It will vary where you are based on the world, what your threat is, but we will all become a victim of some kind of threat of our environment in the near future. And the systems that you count on, that you were taught as a child, if you have a problem, you call 911 and a nice police officer will come and they will help you. You can't count on other people to save you. You are your own savior. And so you have to take a little authority over that and plan and put yourself first and make decisions that are hard, like evacuating even when they say not to evacuate, because you might just be the only person fighting for your own life. So that would be like my recommendation for anybody listening is really take autonomy and take authority over your own survival and safety, because you cannot count on other people to have your best interest in mind as they make decisions. It's not always about your best interest.
And I think that is the most important takeaway from the episode as a whole. It's so hard to contextualize too, because I live in the continental United States where I think, as you mentioned earlier, it's almost like there's infinite resources. If there were a fire in my area that broke out, different counties could come, things from other states could come. Mm-hmm. But especially being on an island, there's already finite resources. And in crisis, not everybody's thinking clearly. Not everyone's taking it seriously. Not to highlight that one dude, but I feel like there were plenty of people in that situation. It's like, well, when is the time to actually panic and treat this as it is? Of course, at some point, it very much set in that this is like a life or death situation. But I feel like when there is something that big coming for you, you snap into like a survival mode of just what is the task ahead of me that I need to complete to just move
Yeah.
forward and secure safety.
Yeah. I experienced so few like deep emotions that entire night because I was so focused on the tasks of like, okay, now I can't breathe. It's time to wet my mask. Now I'm burning. It's time to go wet myself. Now I'm going unconscious in the water. It's time to lift my head up to make sure that I'm not drowning. You didn't have time to feel the feelings of it all. You were just reacting to new and changing situations, and it was changing by the second. And so you're just reevaluating and then reacting and reevaluating and reacting. And I feel very blessed that I had the safety training that I did. I was a scuba diver. I had worked on boats and done Coast Guard training. There's so many moments in my life where I was taught to take care of the situation, solve it, and then later process that feeling. You can think about it all later and learn your lessons later, but in the moment you have to be focused on saving yourself, saving the person that you're helping, whatever the situation is. And I feel really blessed that it came so easily for me, and it didn't come easily for everybody. You think it's natural to like, oh, adrenaline kicks and you have this great fight or flight, but like it's fight or flight. And I think I'm more of the fight, but like flight in this situation wasn't helpful. Michelle, this woman, tried to flight herself through a wall of fire, and she was not thinking clearly and was not focused on the situation. So it's not like an assumed thing, but I was fortunate that because of my training, that's kind of my personal default. And so I think it really speaks to like what a little bit of training can do, what a little bit of talking through a situation. One of the things that warmed my heart the most after my situation is one of my friend's mothers reached out to me and told me that she had a pool in her backyard, and she realized that a lot of the kids in her community didn't know how to swim. And after hearing my story, she felt like it was important for children to know how to swim, just because who knows if that could save their life one day, that having a tool like being able to use water to their advantage could just save their life in some circumstance. And so she hosted paid swim classes, but all of the funds went back to victims of the Maui wildfires. And she taught 15 kids in her community to swim. And so I feel like because of the night that I spent in the ocean, there are at least 15 more children in this world who are just more prepared for something. Who knows what? Even if that's just a fun day at the beach that, goes awry when a strong current picks up or something. You never know what a disaster could look like. And I think just preparing for those kinds of things, not in like a doom and gloom way, not like, scaring your children into fearing that like everything's going to come for them all the time, but just giving them the tools, talk about it. What are your favorite toys? What would you be really sad if we had to lose something? What's the one thing you wouldn't want to lose? And have them pick it and put that in a special bag so that just in case if anything ever happens, or even if it's just like we're going to grandma and grandpa's house for the weekend, that you can take your special bag. Like there's ways to teach kids lessons in ways that aren't damaging or painful, but
There's not scary necessarily, but just gives them options and gives them a framework to handle a situation that might be scary.
Exactly. And I think just equipping yourself and your loved ones, the people you care about, with those tools. Think about the elderly people in your life. I'm getting older now to the point where I'm starting to realize maybe I'm more prepared for an emergency situation than my own mother, because my whole life I've looked up to my mother as somebody that would help me in a situation. And now it's shifting somewhere like, oh, I'm now responsible for helping those that I love above me as well as below me. And what stood out to me about this situation was, Michelle not being able to contact her father in such a vulnerable position. And it just calls to mind the need for things like satellite phones. If you have somebody that's so vulnerable, you need a way to contact them through any emergency, through any outage. And it's so worth the couple $100. It seems like, oh, I don't want to pay for a satellite phone. That's a lot. So cheap compared to losing that person. The little tiny things that you can do that just give you so many more options when bad things happen. The time for doing that is right now. That's the fear I want in people's hearts, is like a fear to get going on training themselves to be their own best source of security and safety.
Yeah.
To be their own savior in that moment. I think one other thing that's important to highlight too, I'm realizing as I'm saying, like, focus so heavily on yourself and train yourself because you're the only person that can save you. I agree with all of that. One thing that I will also just throw in, I feel so blessed in my particular situation to have had, and I hope that anybody in my similar situation would have the same gift, is the community that I was a part of, because Hawaii is different. I grew up on mainland. I lived in Maryland most of my life, and it is different in Hawaii. There is a different culture there, and people are raised with different values around how you treat your neighbor. And it showed on this particular day, because I could imagine in a lot of places in this world, when things get this dire, I say put your own oxygen mask on first, but the emphasis is on so that you can help other people, not so that you can be selfish and be the only survivor.
Yeah.
It's so that you can be well equipped to help other people. And I think people forget that in a lot of the areas that I've lived prior to Hawaii. People forget the love and compassion for the people around you as well. Learn the stuff for yourself so that you're well equipped to do something, but it's not actually just a selfish, like, do it for yourself, because the reason I survived was this group thing. It was Steve saying, go to the ocean. It was Atina telling me to spit out the things I was breathing in. It was these little lessons from all of the people around me that helped me survive. And then afterwards, when we're all living in a shelter together, Red Cross was not the ones that brought us food and blankets and pillows that first day. It was the people in my town. To this day, it's April 22nd of 2024. We're extremely far on from August of 2023. I have received $700 from the government for my losses.
For your entire life, just burning to the ground and countless people around you having the same happen.
I got $700 for that. And not to say that, like, I should become a millionaire because of some tragedy, but, like, it doesn't account for how much I lost. But the people who have stepped in are the local community. Local charities started by people that care are the ones that provided me immediate funds, housing, all these things I needed. And eventually Red Cross came in, FEMA came in to support, although FEMA is really, really difficult. And that's a warning in and of itself for people. It's like, you don't ever want to be in a situation when you're dealing with FEMA, because they're not actually well set up to help you. But what helped the most is the people around us, the people that lived on this island with us, our friends, our family, the people who loved us as a community. They're the ones that fed us and clothed us and took us in their homes and lent us cars and drove us around. Like, they are the ones that cared for us after the fact. And it breaks my heart to think that somebody else somewhere could go through this entire ordeal that I've gone through, and then at the end of it, end up in a dog eat dog world where everybody's going to take for themselves, not give back, and not help them. That is the darkest place that one could end up. I was overwhelmed with gratitude to have had this happen in the community that I did. This was the best place in the world to have this happen, despite the fact that it had no resources. We had none of those things, but I would not have picked it any different, because the support that I had from the people around me reminded me that we were going to get through this, that Lahaina was strong, the people were strong. And I can't say that about every community everywhere. And so that would be the other message I would, like, internalize for people, is be your own strongest self so that you can be the pillar of your community and lead by example and inspire other people to also be loving and kind if something like this happens. Because the second people start going against each other, nobody is safe. It is all downhill from there. Nobody will find peace from a situation like this. And the only way that we found peace was together ultimately. So, be strong by yourself and find your peace in your community.
And I want to say that a lot of people have that bone in them. Maybe 6 months ago, I was driving away from my parents' house and a car got T-boned in a rural intersection. And almost everybody who saw it happen, pulled over to the side, jumped out of the car, like started assessing, like, are the drivers okay? Started guiding traffic. Mm-hmm. And I think there is that instinct in people that when something goes wrong, you want to help. You feel that responsibility and pull.
I hope that exists in everyone. That's the wish I put out into this world following this. Like, my prayer for the world is that everybody holds that in their heart, because those are the things that will get you through. I'm glad to hear that it does exist elsewhere, because I hold some doubt that would happen everywhere. And I'm glad to hear that it happens other places.
Yeah, and I very much understand that's not everywhere, for sure.
I just hope everyone brings that spirit, because that's what's going to help that lady. It's going to help people of Lahaina. It's going to help the citizens of our world when we just love each other and protect each other, but also make sure that you save yourself so that you can help other people, get yourself through, and then be giving to the people around you.
And I don't think we could wrap it up any better than that. Annelise, thank you so much for coming on. I listened to the episode you did on all things wildfire. Shout out to them.
Yeah.
That was a great episode, but I was able to follow it better in this episode. This might be the scariest episode of the show, just because there's no skepticism to this. It did happen. Lives were ruined and lost. And it hits different knowing that this may be something that becomes more common in the future, and almost certainly will.
I used to be a big horror movie person growing up. And for me, the horror movies that always scared me the most, the ones that thrilled me, that I liked most, that I found intriguing, were the ones where when you walk out of the movie theater at the end, you feel like you are still threatened by whatever the thing in the movie was.
Yeah.
So it was never like, it's like, oh, when they catch the killer at the end, it never scares me as much as when you walk away thinking that person's coming for you tonight. And I think that's what's so scary about this story, is that it's not over and that this threat exists just under the surface, all over.
Yeah. And I don't want to undermine the seriousness of the story, but I'd be remiss if I didn't ask, have you had any other spooky or supernatural things happen in your life?
I have, completely unrelated to this. I lost my father when I was young. And I think my only experiences of something like paranormal and spooky came after that, where I was, prior to losing him, not incredibly religious and honestly not very spiritual. I was kind of like, life ends and then it ends, and that's about all you get. And so you should live your life as well as you can because there's not much after. And then I lost my dad and started getting weird signs. Weird things happened in my house. He died in 2009. We're a ways on from that now, but every year for my birthday's coming up very soon in less than a month now. So I'm looking forward to what it's going to be this year. But every year I get a birthday gift. Normally it's in the ocean, but I don't have the ocean with me this year. It's so weird. Every year on my birthday, something crazy good happens to me, and I always know it's for my dad. So I definitely had some spooky moments in my life. As it relates to this fire, I have had less, although after the fact, it took maybe 4 months or so before we were allowed to go back to our town and to our apartments and go and actually look. For a long time, it was under National Guard control. They were doing body recovery and clearing of hazardous materials and such. And eventually we were able to go back, and I was able to actually walk around my building. And my building is a cinder block building, and so it's standing. And half of the units are destroyed. Like, my entire unit looks like a bomb went off inside of it. Everything is rubble, burnt. My refrigerator is melted to the ground. Like, I didn't even know a refrigerator could melt like that. And so my unit is destroyed. And then I share a wall with Freeman. He was just on the other side of one single layer of cinder block. And his apartment next to mine, it's untouched, heavily smoke damaged, and like the glass, like his windows completely melted. I feel very strongly that he would have had no better chance in his apartment. I feel good still that we saved him from being alone in a place like that at a time like that. But it's crazy to me. All of his pictures were on his walls still. And everything was just as he left it. Even 4 months after the fire, it's all just there. And so Atina and I went in and we actually packed up some of his stuff and tucked it away deeper into his apartment so that nobody would come and loot any of it, that his family could come and get it at some point later. And I will admit to a crime here, and I'm sorry for anybody listening. I know he has lawyers in his family, and please do not sue me. I only did this because of the love that I have and needed some piece of Freeman in my life with me. I took one thing from his apartment, an old school alarm clock, one of the ones that has like the bells on top and a little hammer that hits them. And it is still ticking. Even right now, as we're talking, I can hear tick tock in the background of Freeman's clock still ticking. And that's my life clock now. Every tick tock is like a little reminder from Freeman, like, keep living, keep living. So not maybe like super paranormal, but it was really weird to see how a fire could destroy everything that I owned, every piece of my entire life over the last decade. And then 6 inches away on the other side of a piece of rock, every memory of his whole life just sat there still. Super, super eerie to me. But one of the other big blessings that I think I had that night, I have a lot of people that I've lost in my life, unfortunately, but I felt strongly that they were all there really close with me that night. And one of my signs of that is after I was checking all my burns out and seeing how bad my injuries were and everything, I noticed that I have one burn just above my knee that is a perfect heart shape. And so I've already decided I'm going to get that one tattooed. I think it's like a little kiss from my dad of just like, I'm here with you, a little heart right on my knee.
And I think that's the true core of the show, is not that we want to find stories that scare us, just we want to find evidence for there being more to our world, to our lives than meets the eyes in your day to day. And it's beautiful to think that you may have been protected that night.
I feel strongly that I was. And I was actually watching a video yesterday of a woman talking about near-death experiences. And I actually learned something about the experience that I had. It made me reflect on it a little bit deeper than I had prior. Because before I kind of tried to push it away because I didn't want people to think of me as somebody just wanting to talk about this spiritual side of things that I know not everybody believes in. And if you haven't seen or had that experience, I don't expect people to follow along with the journey that I went through. And so I've just kind of like pushed that one to the side a little bit as my personal experience through this. But I watched this video yesterday. This woman was describing exactly what I experienced, like to the point where I was sobbing watching it, being like, oh my God, it was real. Like what I experienced was real because she's describing it, only she had more time there than I had. So her story goes a little bit farther than mine. And I had this realization that the thing that stopped mine from going further was these little dancing orbs of light. I had like 5 little blue lights, 5 to 8. And I realized now they were blocking me. I was being pulled in a direction, and hearing this woman talk about her experience, I think I know the direction I was being pulled. And there was something in my way. And in her account, there was nothing in her way. There was nothing stopping her from that. And I think so strongly that those are my people. Those are my angels right there. So I don't know if other
Blocking you to
people
keep
believe
you
that or
from
not.
walking further towards the metaphorical light, or just a place that was
Yeah.
more dangerous?
Yeah. Yeah. The metaphorical light of something really, really big that was like just over there, that was like calling out for me to go that way. And I could not. I was just like stuck and entranced by these things. And like the second I would get distracted and be like, oh, maybe I should like not pay attention to these lights and instead focus, like they would go crazy. I realize now, like it took me a long time. It took me until literally yesterday to actually process that fully. And so hard to fully explain. And so much of what I've talked about today is fact. It happened. It is real. It's tangible. You can prove it. You can see it. I can show the receipts for every piece of this entire story. And that's the one part that is left up to faith. If people want to believe that portion of my story or not, I completely understand why you would not. And if you hear that and you say, oh my God, there's something to that, I would say back, like, I know, right? It's crazy. But I personally find the experience of talking about it really, really healing. It's almost like therapy, going through the whole experience again. And, I have so much guilt surviving and having somebody I love pass away in this fire, that like to have the chance to say his name and to honor him and to like help save somebody else, that means so much to me. I just want people to know about Lahaina, the sleepy little town that's suffering right now, that's in pain, and people are scared and hurting and trying to make it on $700 from the government after losing everything. And I'm just so grateful for the chance to talk about it. And I am happy to be the vehicle for that, because in the process of talking about it, it heals my soul as well. So thank you.
Hello everyone. Instead of doing the typical outro, I wanted to encourage everyone to check the links in the episode description and consider contributing to the Maui wildfire relief effort. A lot of good people are suffering as a result of this wildfire, and every little bit helps. As always, thank you for tuning in. We'll see you in the next episode.